friends, I'm here today to talk about all the books that I read in July 2023. I finished the Jasad Heir by Zhara at the very start of the month. This is the first book in a new adult fantasy series, and it genuinely took me longer to finish than I thought that it was going to. It has a lot of elements that I normally enjoy. There's political machinations and struggles for power. There is sort of a tournament set up in this, forbidden magic, warring kingdoms, identity and heritage struggles, and those are all things that I usually find interesting in books. Unfortunately, this one fell short for me personally for two reasons. One, the pacing was too slow. I know that it does take time to set up a world and everything, but even the plot itself kind of dragged in the first half of this book. It eventually course corrects, and towards the latter half of the book I was very interested in what was going on, but yeah, it was a bit of a slog for me at the beginning. And then for the characters, I also didn't feel personally connected to them, nor did I feel very strongly about rooting for either of them at this point. It felt like it was just compelling enough for me to want to read about them, but unfortunately I just have no personal investment in this one. I don't know that I'll be continuing the series. If I do, it'll probably be a long time from now. So yeah, I was a little sad. I'm a little sad to have to report that this one was just not for me. The next book I read was an absolute delight, however, in complete contrast, and that is Hook, Line, and Sinker, which is by Tessa Bailey. Readers are brought back to the small fishing town of Westport, only this time we are following Hannah and Fox, who we meet in the first book. And I loved the small town cozy vibes of this one. I love that there's still a very strong music aspect to the story and to the relationship that Fox and Hannah share. And I also like getting to know both Hannah and Fox better. They each have their fair share of insecurities and things that they're trying to work through. They're trying to figure out what they really want and if they're worthy of going after it. And, you know, seeing them struggle through all of those things on their own, but also struggle to really lean into the romance blossoming between them. It was all very compelling for me to read, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun reading this book, and I got very deeply emotionally invested in the outcome of the story, which is how I know that this is a romance that really worked for me. The next book I read was actually really enjoyable, and I don't own a copy, but it was really fun, and that is The Water Outlaws by S.L. Huang. So from the minute I started it, and every single time I picked it up after having to set it down for like work or other life stuff, I was really sucked right into this book. It is a mix of power dynamics and magical, somewhat scientific forces sometimes, camaraderie, and unlikely heroes that entertained me greatly. I was really into the story from the very beginning. There were moments that I felt like cheering, and then moments that made me mad, and then others that made me sad, and generally it was just, you know, a lot of feelings for the story. It kind of reminds me of how I feel sometimes when I'm watching some exciting anime. That's sort of the vibe that I got from it. The only thing that prevented me from loving this one even more is that because of the size of the cast of characters and because of the number of moving pieces, like plot and character-wise in the story, I didn't really feel like I was strongly connected to or invested in any of them. And as you guys know, that is something that I personally look for. But this is definitely a very enjoyable read. I would look up some content and trigger warnings. There's definitely some things here that might, you know, you might need to know in advance. But for me, ultimately, this was a fun time. Another book that was a fun time is a novella, and that is Thornhedge, which is by T. Kingfisher. This is a book that I genuinely enjoyed. It has modern fairy tale vibes in it, and I love that T. Kingfisher took some elements of the Sleeping Beauty fairy tale and kind of turned it on its head. It's probably one of my favorite takes on that particular fairy tale that I've ever read, which is saying something. It's a potential what-if sort of scenario that kind of spins out into something bigger, and I liked getting to know the characters, and I liked seeing the plot unfold and finding out the real truth behind the story. It's definitely the one I've enjoyed most of the two Kingfisher things that I have read so far. Then I read a romance book, and that is A Cosmic Kind of Love, which is by Samantha Young. I think I would have liked this even more if it didn't feel like at a certain point the story was dragging on too long. But anyway, it was a solid romance read. I liked getting to know our main heroine, Hallie, and our hero, Chris, a lot. I like seeing their relationship develop and also seeing them work through the personal struggles that they were facing. I'll say that Hallie is definitely a character that I find is hit or miss for other readers. I think my friend Rachel didn't particularly, for example, get on with Hallie. For me, like, I was patient enough to just keep going with the story to see what the outcome would be. Their career paths separately were really interesting too, and that added a unique aspect to the story that I hadn't really anticipated coming. But yeah, this was a good time. I laughed and I swooned and I got a little bit of the feels, so it was a solid romance read for me. And then I read a one-shot manga, and it is Naruto, the War Within the Spiral, and this is about Minato Namikaze, who is the 4th Hokage in the Naruto series and one of my favorite characters. I'm obviously a bit biased about this because I love him so much, but it was so excellent, and it was basically Kishimoto just building on this world and this lore and these characters' histories that already exist, and doing it in a way that felt like it fit right in with the rest of the series, and I quite enjoyed that. There were so many good panels and so many moments that I loved in this one, so I had a good time. I then also read The Kiss Curse, which is by Aaron Sterling, and I actually have yet to read the previous book in the series, The XX. I did enjoy the cozy, witchy vibes of this one, and that was exactly kind of what I was expecting, and it's what I got. The shenanigans, the witchy shenanigans that happened in this one were also fun to read about. It was genuinely cool to follow Gwyn and Wells, who are the main couple in the series. Their banter and the way that their relationship unfolds was really fun for me. I always love it when they're kind of opposing forces who end up having to work together at some point. That usually works well for me. So this was a charming, cozy read. Would definitely recommend it in the fall, although I think any time of the year is a good time to read it. Next we have Do I Know You, which is by Emily Wibberley and Austin Siegemund Broca. I really loved the last adult book that these authors put out. I thought it was nuanced, especially because it focused on a complicated relationship dynamic, and that's sort of what happens here. I think they really have a knack for teasing out the sort of truth, raw and like unpolished truth of the characters in their stories who feel like real people who are going through some very real things. There's obviously a lot of miscommunication in this one because the premise is about a married couple who are pretending they don't know each other while they're away on a trip together, just to see if they can sort of find their way back to being completely in love like they once were. Your tolerance for that sort of thing is going to be a personal, subjective sort of system. For me, it was like mild to mid. There was a point where I was really towards the edge and like about to tip over, but it pulled back before then. I did find it really interesting to see how the authors explored the different insecurities that the characters were going through, what they really wanted, and ultimately I was also really behind how they decided to wrap up this story. Next, we have one of my favorite books of the year, and that is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. This is honestly one of the most delightful books that I've gotten to read in a very long time, and I am so thoroughly happy that I finally got to it because it was so good and it just made me so happy. It has so many elements that I absolutely loved. There's a very cozy vibe. It's like there's the comfort of nowhere home and the lovely magic that is sprinkled all throughout. And then you have this wonderful cast of characters who are impossible not to love. Like, I absolutely adored the children. I enjoyed the main character, the entire household. It was just wonderful. There are heartwarming relationships of all sorts. There's friendships and romance and family, and that was wonderful too. The emotional beats in this one were also really well done. There were lots of moments that made me laugh and lots of moments that made me cry or feel really, really sad on behalf of my characters. I also got angry at times and extra defensive just because I loved everyone so much. And of course, the story was compelling and readable and had me hooked from the start all the way till the end. I honestly did not know how things were going to end, but it felt so satisfying and so good to have it end where it did. I genuinely had one of the most magical reading experiences of the year reading this one, and I'm so happy about it, and I cannot wait for the next book. I then picked up Zhara, Guardians of the Dawn, Zhara. This is by S.J. Jones. This has been on my radar for a couple of years now because originally it was pitched sort of as something that could be comped to Sailor Moon. My verdict is that it's good, but I don't think it's a YA book that I personally would find particularly memorable. It reads a lot younger than I was anticipating, which is not a bad thing per se since, you know, YA covers a huge spectrum of ages. That's fine. It does have a lot of interesting elements. I like the magical lore because there's definitely a mix of legends and elemental powers and sort of magical individual vibes in it. The nods to different Asian cultures, and of course there's a large cast of characters to follow, which feels very anime-ish because it's kind of like a collect them as you go kind of thing. The plot and the relationships played out pretty predictably overall, which I think is why I didn't find it particularly memorable. This is not to say that it's not likable. It is. It's just not quite a standout to me because it, you know, is executed in pretty much the ways I was expecting. I do think there's potential for the next book in the series to take things up a notch again, which is enough to keep it on my radar and as something I would potentially continue in the future. And the last book that I finished in July is one that everyone has been talking about on the internet, and that is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I like this book. I understand the appeal overall to everyone. It didn't quite hit the 5-star mark for me. There's a few elements of this one that sort of feel like they could have been done a little better, but overall I did enjoy a lot of it. I like the academy setting, and I like the trial setup, and I love the dragons. The dragons are my favorite part of the book, let's be real. I was rooting for the main character. I enjoyed the action and the intrigue and just the overall like flow of the story. It was really entertaining, and you know, at the end of the day, that's all I was really anticipating going into it. Yeah, 4th thing, I finally read it and I enjoyed it. And those are all the books that I read in the month of July this year. I will see you guys with a new video soon. Bye!